What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. A while back we did a video on 10 abilities you might not know existed in League of Legends, and you guys liked the video a lot, so we did some more digging and we found some more awesome abilities that you guys probably didn't know were in the game at some point and were removed. And to be honest, these abilities are way cooler than the ones we did in the last video, but keep in mind that most of them are from the alpha stage or even the pre-alpha stage actually, so there isn't much in the way of footage for them. So we're going to create some graphics like we normally do. We managed to dig up some information and screenshots, though that does give us some really good feel for how each one of them worked. Some of you might remember or maybe know about some of these, but they should be pretty new for most of you, so we're really excited to bring them. And remember, if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, and if you don't, hit that dislike. And our first ability in the Blast from the Past is pretty appropriate because it was on Zilean. This ability was called Recall. Zilean channels temporal energy to refresh an ally's ability. This was the original version of what eventually turned into his Rewind, and yes, you heard that right. Rather than resetting his own cooldowns, he could reset the cooldown of an allied champion's ability. This definitely would change Zilean's feel a lot because he's balanced around using his abilities to reset his own cooldowns, so by himself he'd probably be a little bit weaker on his own, but you can imagine how game breaking this could be with some characters. One of the best things about this ability is how you could create team compositions to really take advantage of it, and Riot would probably balance it to not affect ultimate abilities, but there's still some crazy powerful Q, W, and E abilities in the game that could just be totally insane when refreshed. Any champion with a long area of effect crowd control would be disgustingly overpowered with that ability refreshed. Morgana Bind for like 6 seconds, Alistar Pulverize, and if you needed more damage, maybe you refresh Veigar's Dark Matter or Victor's Death Ray or something like that. Things would get really interesting with Recall still in the game, but it's probably a good thing that it's gone. Next up we have Soraka's old ultimate, Purify. This was an active ability that cleansed all debuffs and restored a large amount of health to an allied target unit. It never made it past the alpha stage, but to be honest, it might actually be a more fair ultimate than her current one, and the writers did actually test some version of this ability for future Soraka reworks that happened 5 or 6 years later. Soraka is so powerful right now because she can save her team no matter how far away on the map they are with that global heal. It's a huge clutch play, and it can swing a fight with little to no effort on Soraka's part, aside from just pressing her ultimate. On the other hand, this ability would be way more powerful in lane and would also make her an awesome niche pick to counter high single target burst damage or to keep her carry alive through debuffs. It of course would not be global, so Soraka would be forced to remain near the carries she wanted to protect, which also does put her in a position to be killed as well. It would really change the dynamic of how Soraka works and fits into the meta at the moment, but it would also be a really interesting piece of her kit if Riot decided to bring it back. And let's be honest, with the changes to Quicksilver Sash, AD carries could definitely use a way to bring up their survivability again versus those pesky Zed ultimates. Next up we have Annie's old W, and it was called Ghastly Shield, and in all honesty, it's actually not that much of a change compared to her current Molten Shield. We don't really know whether this ability was a resistance boost like Molten Shield or if it just reduced the damage it took, but what this ability actually shows us is that Annie was originally not a fire mage. Instead, she was some kind of evil summoner probably, who used spirits to attack and protect. I think it's probably a good thing that Riot decided to turn Annie into a fire mage, because it did free up that design space for other champions that want to interact with spirits. Take Yorick for example, but it could also have been pretty cool anyway on Annie. There's even talk that the spirits that materialize to protect Annie are maybe her dead parents, at least in the lore. Kind of spooky there. Next up on our list, it's something with Kayle, and she's a champion that's been changed quite a lot, and you can see why when you hear about one of her old abilities, Eye for an Eye. This ability was an active effect that caused Kayle to deal damage in an area of effect around her for all the damage that she takes. We really like this ability because it gives Kayle that vengeful, furious angel feeling that fits well thematically, but it was probably too strong overall. There's a limit to how much damage Kayle can reflect because she died from taking so much damage anyway, but it could potentially really punish a team for attacking her, which isn't exactly the kind of gameplay you want since it's pretty feel bad. It's quite awkward to have to take damage to deal damage as well, which is one of the reasons why Riot decided it needed to be changed. Champions do need to feel consistent, and this ability would be really hit or miss, so it was removed towards the end of closed beta. And we're doubling up on the original Zilean abilities today as we talk about his old ultimate next, which was called Time Twister. It read, Zilean unleashes an area of effect debuff on enemy units in a single location. Every 2.5 seconds, Time Twister stuns targets for 1 second while also dealing damage. And this ability sounds crazy broken, being able to keep multiple targets locked down with stuns every couple of seconds while also dealing area of effect damage. It actually sounds a lot like a combination between Victor's W and his ultimate, so maybe Victor's abilities were actually inspired by this original creation of Zilean. It's a lot more balanced on Victor though, because it's 2 abilities for the same effect as Zilean's single ultimate, and it's still not as powerful because Victor can only stun targets once, whereas Zilean could stun them multiple times. Time Twister was definitely too powerful a champion that could already deal huge area of effect damage with his time bombs. So the change to his current ultimate, Chrono Shift, was a pretty good decision by Riot, and Chrono Shift suits him way better thematically because it plays more on the fact that he's a time-based mage, while also making him more viable as a support without losing any power in the process. Turning back time to save an ally is still really powerful, just not as ridiculous as an area of effect damage chain stun ultimate. And for our next ability, we're looking at Tryndamere's original W. It was called Mighty Cleave. Tryndamere swings his sword in an arc, dealing attack damage to nearby enemies and slowing them down for a duration. And keep in mind that at this time, Tryndamere still had the same dash ability that deals damage to all targets in his path on his E. And so that means that rather than one ability that deals area of effect damage and lets him keep up with escaping enemies, he actually had 2. Tryndamere could deal with multiple targets just as well as he could as dueling a single target, and the passive let him gain some health for killing minions and even more health for killing champions at the time, and he also gained attack speed and movement speed for killing units, so essentially he could use his dash and cleave to quickly clear minion waves to stack up high on health, movement speed, and attack speed buffs, and then turn all of that power onto the enemy laner. And with all that power, you'd think there'd have to be some kind of compromise, right? Well, this was in the alpha, so no. He could still go invulnerable with his ultimate, and he'd still gain critical strike increases as his health dropped lower. Kind of insane from a balance perspective, so he was changed to be a lot fairer, reducing his overall damage by removing Mighty Cleave and replacing it with Mocking Shout, which kind of does the same thing honestly, just without the damage. The first passive on our list is the second Kayle ability called Vengeance. It was added in a slight remake that she received towards the end of the closed beta as an ability called Holy Fervor. It gave Kayle and all nearby allied champions 10% bonus attack speed, but if a champion died while under the effects of Holy Fervor, Kayle's attack speed would be further increased by 20% as she attempted to avenge them, and it stacked for each death. Now you might think that that sounds pretty crazy, but Riot actually went even further, and in a later patch, Kayle actually had the attack speed amplification on the ability buffed to 25% per stack, and her Q Reckoning had the damage increased by 25% if she also had stacks of the passive. Holy Fervor wasn't a badass a name for such a powerful ability though, so Riot renamed it to Vengeance, and they changed it back around 10 patches later though. It wasn't until patch 87 that Holy Fervor was finally changed and the Vengeance mechanic was removed altogether from Kayle, replaced with an ability that converted her attack damage to AP and vice versa. Vengeance was a very powerful ability, especially for a passive, and although it gave some unique flavor to Kayle's character, it seems like something that could never really be balanced to play fairly, and it also rewarded Kayle players for letting their allies die if they were fed, which is not really ideal for a champion that should be saving them with their ultimate. Overall, Vengeance was a pretty cool mechanic, but it just didn't really make that much sense gameplay-wise. Next up, we're looking at an ability from Tristana. Before Tristana had her rocket jump, she actually had another ability that altered her auto attacks called Draw a Bead. Sound familiar? Well, it's now her passive, but it originally was one of her basic abilities, and it caused Tristana to aim more carefully, increasing her attack range but also slowing her movement speed. This is interesting because it gave Tristana the ability to outrange most other AD carries at the cost of her mobility. It was quite dangerous to use though because enemies could use that timing to dash on top of her and take her out in a fight. It's pretty important to stay mobile, and this ability was actually very weak considering the fact that it was in her kit instead of rocket jump, so she was actually immobile at the time, and so Riot improved the ability by removing the slow component, leaving Draw a Bead permanently active, and then eventually putting it on her passive and giving her rocket jump. And although she had some attack speed from her Q and the range boost from Draw a Bead, Tristana was actually one of the weaker champions during the beta. Although Tristana wasn't necessarily terrible, she just wasn't up to par considering the fact that she had that lack of mobility, and this version of Draw a Bead also meant that she kind kind of had one less ability than other champions. If you consider her Q's a passive, her W was a passive, draw a bead, and then her passive was also a passive, so she only really had explosive shot and buster shot. Riot eventually corrected this by adding rocket jump, and then shifting draw bead to her passive, where it's remained ever since. And Tristana's mini counter rework that happened during the alpha, it was updated to affect new parts of her kit, but essentially it's the same old range increases it always used to be. And next up, we're taking a look at something that's a little bit convoluted since the information we have behind it is a little bit cloudy, and it's Soraka's original passive, Consecration. To explain the original form of this passive, we have to explain her entire original kit. Her Q was the old form of Star Call, which remained relatively unchanged between release up until her eventual rework, where it was changed into a skill shot, where it would damage nearby enemies and reduce their magic resistance. Her W was called Bless, which would provide damage reduction and health restoration to a targeted allied unit or herself. Her E was called Wish, which would restore mana to a friendly unit, which could also be cast on herself, and her original ultimate at this point was Purify, which we already covered towards the beginning of the video. Her original passive, Consecration, increased the damage of Star Call, the duration that the damage reduction on Bless gave, and reduced the cooldown of Wish so that she could restore allied manas more frequently. It scaled up at levels 6, 11, and 16, increasing those bonuses and reductions, and on release, Bless was changed to give armor to the friendly healed unit instead of just damage reduction, and it was renamed to Astral Blessing. Wish was renamed to Infuse, and the name Wish was instead given to her new ultimate, the Global Heal, that has been a core part of Soraka's kit ever since her release. In the June 19th, 2009 patch, Consecration was reworked to give a magic resistance aura to nearby allies, and increased magic resistance isn't a particularly interesting passive, but to be honest, the original Consecration didn't exactly make that much sense. Why bother to have a passive that buffs your other abilities when you could just have the abilities scale in that way by themselves? It made a lot of sense to me to change Consecration into just a different ability, and it was pretty powerful in this form on release though. An Aegis of the Legion kind of passive from the start of the game was a super cool way to defend against multiple AP champions on the enemy team, but eventually it was removed and replaced by the now existing form of her passive, Salvation. Instead of offering movement speed though, it did used to make her restore more health or mana based on how much health or mana the target was missing. Anyway, there you have it, 9 awesome abilities that were removed from League of Legends. What was your favorite ability? Did you see anything you wish was maybe still in the game? Let us know in the comments section below, and that's going to be it from me. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.